So welcome. This is the second Texas A&M University and University of Maryland College Park PM Roundtable. And we are here to talk about important topics like today's Agile in non-software industry. So hopefully today what you're going to get out of this discussion is an opportunity to learn about the types of lessons that you can pull from Agile that anyone can use regardless of the industry, especially those outside of software where, you know, Agile kind of had its birthplace, but we know that we want to be applying these tools and techniques wherever we can. With us, we have a group of esteemed panelists, and they're going to be talking about their experiences, and I'm looking forward to hearing from each one of them. So I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves, starting with Amy Beckner. And Amy, maybe you can tell us, what does Agile mean to you?
Awesome. So Amy Beckner, will say my name 3 times in a row and I might get a genie with 3 wishes. So I actually work at Texas Instruments. And so we do new product development of both analog and digital, basically components. And so mainly a manufacturing company. So I do a lot of stage gate, right? Like I can't release a product if I haven't designed it first. It's not actually a place where you would typically think about being agile. But I work in an environment where I build commodity products. And so I release 100 different things in a year. And so Agile to me means being nimble, right? If I'm building $100 million processor that's going to take 5 years, you have a lot of processes built into that, right? And you've now put, I would say, some of that burden on. My cycle time is a few months, right? And my development cost is a fraction of $100 million, right? I better be able to build an op amp in less time and money than that. And so for me, nimble is understanding, right? And what is the purpose of this big, heavy process? And how can I make it faster, more efficient? How can I make sure that I'm not going slower because the process itself that's meant to cover the basis from the simplest 3-pin device that we release to a 1,000-pin device, right? Being able to find the goal of what we're trying to do, understanding certain things have to go in certain orders, right? I can't actually release silicon until I have it in my hand, but what can I do to be faster and quicker and more efficient? And so for me, I use nimble or agile, which is being quick to move, right? And not being overburdened by, you know, a very defined process in a manufacturing company that I can tell you is all about process. So they're all about process. So that is me.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let's go to Kate Kenny.
Hi, so my name is Kate Kenny, and I actually work for a company called International Systems Management Corps, or ISM for short. And we are a defense contractor. We support the Navy, basically looking at software systems. So Agile is not very foreign to that. But the project that I work on right now is called the Forge, which is one of the Navy's very first software factories. And we are working on the integrated combat system, which is both hardware and software solutions. So we are using Agile in the context of both software development, but also our hardware development and our project management kind of approach within our PMO office. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. We joke that we're agile in a waterfall world, that we have a lot of big DoD processes around us that are trying to change and evolve, but we're kind of on that leading cutting edge, trying to figure that out as we go. So that's what I do.
Great. Lisa Malman.
Sure. Hi, I'm Lisa Malman, and I'm just retired from Lockheed Martin after 36 years. But the type of work that we do is relative to design, development, and modernization of aircraft, whether it's fighter jets, whether it's cargo aircraft or reconnaissance, and many others that I can't really tell you about. So we have a lot of manufacturing in that, right? So, and even the modernization involves manufacturing of new parts for existing aircraft. So after my roles there, I've been in both the design world and the modernization world and the sustainment or customer support role. What you find is that you absolutely have to work around all the folks who are in the Agile software world And so therefore you have to be nimble in your hardware and how you integrate it. And so for me, Agile is really applying the techniques that work in the software world, but can be applied to a waterfall scenario. So look forward to talking to you this evening.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Neil, Agile or maybe integrated project delivery, what does it mean to you?
Well, it certainly means integrated project delivery. I'm Neil Schulman. I'm an adjunct professor at Maryland in John's group, and I've been there since 1995. But until a few years ago, I was an active practitioner in the construction industry, working mainly for the general contractors, and then went over to the owner's side. So I got a little bit of both the builder and the owner. But Agile project management in the construction industry, to me, is really being flexible, especially in the planning and design stages of construction, when you have to integrate as an owner with the designer. And of course, with our new project delivery methods of design, build, and construction management at risk, that's bringing in the builder very early on. So you have the three main groups, the owner, the designer, and the builder, working in an integrated process. And, it's kind of interesting. We never thought the construction industry had Agile project management. But believe it or not, we didn't know it, but we actually did. And we do, both in the planning and design stage and in the construction stage, where we do a lot of things being very flexible. You have a schedule that you prepare at the beginning of a project, but things happen and it changes. So you've got to be flexible, nimble, and make changes. And we'll talk some more about that a little later in the session.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you all for being here and for giving us your expert views on Agile. Let's start off with a question of, how do we know if Agile is an appropriate approach for your project? What would be some of the signs you would look for? Amy, let's start with you.
So as I mentioned, right, there are certain phases in my new product development that I am not ever going to be able to make Agile. So what I have to look at is which parts of each of those pieces that have to be done in a certain order, right? So I'm just going to go quickly a little bit about how part of it, what I do is theoretical, and part of what I do is actually tangible in your hand. So when a semiconductor is actually designed by these really smart, right, typically PhD and master's level, they're laying down literally transistors and wires in theory, right? And then that could be Agile. How am I going to go from design, layout, schematic review, design verification, making sure that I'm closing all the things to make sure, because particularly in semiconductors, it's ounce of prevention, pound of cure, right? Because the minute I go through the months that it takes to actually fabricate that theoretical silicon and get it in hand, I've spent a lot of money, and it is not an opportunity for Agile, because I would love to be able to spin that silicon overnight and get a new revision of it, and that is just not how it works, right? So we spend a lot of time in that theoretical. I mean, literally, we're designing on a computer using really amazing systems that can basically theoretically design semiconductors, right? But inside that, what's Agile? What can we do? So honestly, within each stage, right, I'm definitely a stage gate, right? You have to pass all the criteria and everything before we cut the glass that it takes to make a semiconductor, right? Inside that, we'll look at, is there any piece in the next phase that we could incorporate into where we're at now? If I'm waiting for the tangible, of course not. But is there any planning or any prep or anything that we could do to shorten the cycles in those phases? So in a way, it's hybrid, right? I definitely have stage gates, right? I cannot release the product if I haven't designed it. I mean, that's just not how you can do those things. But inside of it, don't be looking at, I can only do step one after step two. How can I, in those buckets, find, right? I can't jump 4 steps ahead, but I can be thinking a step ahead, right? What can I do in that next phase, right? To be better prepared, to do it faster, to spin it quicker. So you could absolutely find Agile in those pieces, even if you're building something, right? In stages, waterfall. So me, that's where I'll look at each of those pieces, particularly on larger projects where they're multiple years long. You have those opportunities. I'm not right? I'm going to find parallelize, right? Where can I
Oh, yeah.
parallelize things that different people are working on that make sense? And so that's where we kind of, in my world, I look at what can I pull in earlier, but I'm not looking so far ahead, because if I don't have something in hand, I certainly can't pull that in earlier. But just looking at how can we do things faster, and honestly, why is a lot of what I question, right? In Agile, you're looking at the scope, what are we trying to do, and you're going to be deciding, right? And so I don't, even in a new product development, have my scope set completely. I have those I must haves. I actually have an artifact of our projects called boundary agreements, right? And in that, they tell me that we have to do these things. But if you've ever looked at a semiconductor data sheet, and it is tens and 20 to hundreds of pages long, there's a lot of just kind of extra things that are nice to have. And so even that of Agile, where you're continually adjusting your scope, I'll look at that as well. I only have a certain amount of time or a certain amount of money,
Yep.
right? So I'll also be looking at the scope of, we hit a snag on a must-have, is a nice to have, or a, I call it cherry on top. That's probably what we're going to sacrifice. And so part of that is just understanding that even in developing a product where I've made a commitment, I have some flexibility, like Agile, where
You have
when
trade-offs.
you're doing your Scrum, right, and something's not going, you kind of continually figure out what you're going to do. I certainly cannot decide halfway through a product to change my semiconductor. It does not work that way. But there are certainly trade-offs from the Agile world of scope that you absolutely include in as we're moving along, the trade-offs. But we outline it up at the front, like these are the specifications. The whole reason we're doing this product, will never sacrifice that. But some of the other things will adjust specs.
So you have hard specifications that you can't adjust, but
Yep.
especially early on where you're in the simulators and you're looking at things in software and you're looking for opportunities to pull forward from the next phase,
Yep.
past that gate, how can you get learning earlier? Where is the trade-off space around the should and could have requirements that you have? And that allows you to look for opportunities to add Agile and hybridize what it is that you're doing.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. I'm curious, what about you, Lisa, in terms of your experience in Agile delivery? How do you know when Agile is appropriate for these big systems?
Right. So first and foremost, you look and say, is there software in my project? Where does it interface? So you look for an integrated schedule like you do in project management, and you figure out, here's what all the elements look like, and here are their integration pieces. And then what you need to look at is software is going to be on a 2-week sprint, which means it's not going to line up exactly the way historically it did with hardware. So now all of a sudden we look at, do we have issues in the supply chain that's going to require us to do things differently? What do we have to do from a standpoint of making sure that when software is ready to interface with the hardware, how do we do that? And things like, I need to go into the lab earlier. Hardware long cycle is typically, when you go into a lab, you want to have as mature hardware as possible, but you might end up taking what we call brass board. Brass board hardware is not something that's really flight certified. So in airplanes, you really want flight certified hardware always. So we won't necessarily have flight worthy hardware. So you make the trade and you work with your customer to say, look, I'm going to use brass board. And so you introduce it earlier so that you can catch those integration issues between software and hardware. And the same thing happens with supply chain. So in modernization, that's a development suggestion. In modernization, we can never get hardware fast enough to modernize an airplane for a customer within the year or 2 years that they want it done. So we look ahead at starting things early and estimating how we're going to do hardware in a more agile fashion, knowing history from it, knowing and understanding integration points, understanding how it has to facilitate at the end. And so we go and bring it in sooner. And so there are a couple of places that we do that. Absolutely.
Interesting. And that's the merriment of how can you ensure that your hardware and your selection around hardware is able to enable your agility and also support the agility that you can definitely get from system behavior through software.
Absolutely. And we've got to do that. Think what has happened since we've had COVID. Supply chain issues have gone through the roof as lead times and so forth. And so you have to rethink how you sequence your work. Absolutely. Even though it's a kind of a waterfall thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of which, I mean, and then we end up with situations where we have hard deadlines. And I know a little bit about how you need to be ready for that platform release. Kate, in your experience, when you're looking at a must release strict timeline, how do you ensure the integration of hardware and software going out to those new platforms through those to those ships, in time for when they're ready to be upgraded?
Yeah, so it's a really tricky question, right? Because the ship is it's a stationary object, or not a stationary object, right? But you have a very limited window in which you can go install that hardware, install that software. So I think for us, actually, Agile lends itself really well in that cadence-based delivery, in that our teams are consistently integrating our software and our hardware, testing that in a lab environment, right? And getting that ready to go so that when a ship does become available, we have something ready to deliver. I think the thing that changes though, right, is the scope of that delivery, right? We don't necessarily have all of our requirements up front about what that software will do, or even that hardware necessarily, right? We have a target for functionality or a target for features that we want to deliver to that ship, and we negotiate that, throughout the life cycle of that product. But it does lend itself in some ways in terms of, if you're already working on a cadence-based delivery and you're doing those things on a continuous basis, when you do have that very short window of time to hit a milestone for a delivery, you have a higher rate of success because you've done a lot of the testing and integration work ahead of time. What you don't want, right, is somebody developing software in a corner and somebody developing hardware in another corner, not talking to each other, and then they have 3 days to go install something and it doesn't work, right? Because that causes delays. So yeah, Agile helps us kind of in that delivery cadence.
Getting those feedback loops and learning from each other and making sure that it will integrate.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's been one of the biggest benefits for us, even using it from like a project management standpoint in our PMO office. All projects are going to have feedback loops, right? They're all going to have setbacks, they're all going to have failures, opportunities, risks, et cetera. And doing that on a regular basis throughout all areas of our project has been really helpful for us because I think we're delivering better products on a more rapid basis.
Excellent. I'm curious then, Neil, in your experience with construction management, do these integrated approaches like construction management, risk, and design build, do they help also with meeting strict deadlines and adjusting scope?
They definitely do. As a builder, and most of my experience has been a builder in the built environment, there's only 3 things you need to remember as a builder. Get work, do work, and keep score. Get work, do work, and keep score. Those are the only 3 things you have to remember. And then if you put it into place, it'll work out well. But let's talk a little bit about the answer to your question with the get work part of it. Until about 15 or 20 years ago, most owners brought on builders through what's called design bid build. They'd hire an architect, engineer, design firm, design a project with plans and specs, and then go out, bid it out to contractors, and the low bidder or the best value contractor got the job. And they completely missed the cycle of planning and design, which is a big, big problem of not getting the builder involved during the planning and design. You could make a $1 mistake in design, and when it gets to construction, that could be a $100 construction problem. So getting the builder involved early on, and to more appropriately answer your question, John, what's happened over the last 15, 20 years has been a shift to design build, where the owner hires one organization to do all design and all construction, but they get involved obviously very early from day one. Construction management at risk is another method. Basically, the builder works at risk with usually a guaranteed maximum price, but gets involved very early on in the planning stage. And then finally, when you get into the actual project, one of the things that we do in scheduling and really has taken forward the last 10 years or so is what we call lean construction. It's a form of agile project management where, let's say you've got a $100 million project with 10,000 activities in your schedule, and you meet every week. Well, you can't go over thousands of activities. So the methodology has been to take a look at what are you going to do on this project for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Let's just take a snapshot of a short interval schedule, maybe several dozen, maybe 100 activities, and really focus on that. And what's the milestone 2 months or 3 months from today? And that's the end date. And let's say it's August 1st. Let's get all the people that are going to build the project today who didn't make that schedule up 2 years prior and see how they're going to get from today to August 1st in a better fashion. That to me is integrative project management. It's agile project management. In the construction industry, maybe we don't call it that, but that's what it is.
Fantastic. Is that like the last planner system that you were just describing there? Is that
Yes, exactly. You got it.
Excellent, excellent. Well, and I think we've talked about a lot of different techniques, approaches, principles, some specific to certain industries. And questions have been coming in about definitions, about lean principles and waterfall versus Scrum versus Agile. So let me just ask this kind of openly. How do you identify what pieces of Agile in particular, let's say the full body of knowledge out there that you can tap into? What do you look at to leverage, and how do you define those pieces and characteristics to adopt for where you're working? So I'm curious about, how do you identify those pieces, and what inspires you to be more agile based off of kind of the approaches that you've seen work for you and in other places? Amy, maybe we can start with you again.
So I would actually say the daily stand-up meeting, I do not do that all the time, but when something goes wrong, right, and you are in debug mode, I find that basically that 15-minute stand-up meeting, as it's called in Agile, we will have, right? Because I can't wait a week or 2 or 3 for us. We're talking, I don't need updates on the hour, but I need everybody to come with what happened in the last day. Because much to what Neil kind of spoke to, $1 in a silicon design theoretically costs me way more than that, right? It can, in some of our devices, it's $1 million to cut the glass, right? That is huge, just one small mistake, right? And so we will do that where I've actually caught myself, I know better. And we were in the middle of a debug and I didn't set up a daily meeting, and it went way slower than it needed to be because we were not putting the attention on the issue, right? When things are going well, maybe I don't need to talk to you every day, but when you're in what in the world is going on and we need to figure out a solution quickly, having nobody has time for 4-hour meetings, 15-minute daily stand up first thing in the morning. And my team is international, so that stand up might be in the it might be in the evening for everybody. But we do a maybe every other day if it's, Friday to Monday, because we don't necessarily make everybody work every weekend. But we need constant communication. And so that idea of I can't build a semiconductor overnight, I can debug, right? What simulation did you run, right? What experiment, what data did we take? What progress have you made? What actions have we closed? Because we don't want to lose even a day. Right.
Keeping first things first and on everyone's mind with that stand-up meeting.
Exactly. And so we will have that cross-functional from multiple time zones to make sure that it's high on everybody's priority list. But I will only implement that in the all hands on deck moment, right? Where something has gone off the rails and we need to get back on. The minute that things are looking better, you kind of go back to that standard, I'll talk to you about what we're doing for the next couple of weeks, or we'll meet once a week for our standard project update, but you incorporate that tactic as necessary, and then you turn it off when it's not necessarily necessary.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it keeps it from being a burden. It keeps it a focus.
Yep.
Anyone else have a particular technique or tool that they look to or employ, or maybe a suite of them that they find useful?
So I'll go ahead and jump in with that. And I look at the stand-up meetings, and I do them weekly if I don't need to do them on a daily basis, depending on what's happening. But it helps for teams who need to be held accountable, right, without really pushing on anyone in particular. And it also, I've learned when you have the conversation of, okay, just talk to me in the next 2 weeks, even if it's waterfall. I know I saw a question come through on waterfall. Waterfall means that you're in a standard step-by-step process that seems to go in sequence. Okay, so drawing releases, for instance, for a design project, you go through a series of release processes, and you have to do the smaller drawings and then the larger integrated drawings. But when you have a young staff, sometimes you have to go through and have them be able to look short term at what they can get done. Okay, and that's increasingly happening with a changeover our workforce. So so quick 2-week looks at even what you're about to go do, and then stand up meetings at least weekly, and then going to daily if you have a person who's kind of struggling or a group that's struggling.
Excellent. Yeah, that multi-level planning that helps you do just enough at the time that you need it to be really effective. That makes a lot of sense. What about in the areas of risk management when adopting some of these agile techniques? What are some of the ways in which we can ensure that we are considering the risk, and how do we need to rethink our approaches to actively managing risk using Agile? I'm kind of curious, Kate, if there's some methods in particular you use to keep risk in front of the minds of people as needed.
Yeah, so for us, we incorporate risk into pretty much every activity or ceremony that we have with our teams. So that means our developers, our hardware engineers, right, our program managers, and kind of anything in between, we incorporate that into the conversation. So it's pretty much always on the agenda for every meeting that we have. I think the major mind shift for us is that kind of dealing with large scale systems that are built, over a long period of time and then delivered in one big bang, kind of shifting that to an agile approach means that we have to think about risk in a much shorter period of time. We certainly have long-term risks and large programmatic risks that come into play, but we had to start thinking about that kind of more on the shorter kind of cadence base. So if I'm working a 2-week sprint and I am about to start some work, but I don't have something in place, I think it's coming, I think I can get there, right? But I'm not exactly sure if I'm going to have it. That's a risk, right? That we want our teams to document before they start their sprint. If it's just like absolutely not going to happen, or there's no way we can get that right, that's an issue. And you treat those things differently, right? Risk has a probability associated with it. By issues, that it's 100% probability, right? It already has occurred. And so that's been a major shift for our teams, because I think most of our team members were used to risk management kind of being like a specific role or a specific person, not their problem, not something they think about, not something they're responsible for. And so we've really kind of shifted that onto every member of our team and really tried to implement that across our organization. And so we offer lots of coaching and help and support and teams and team members as they're trying to kind of rethink that or relearn risk management. So you don't have to be a project manager to understand risk or be responsible for risk in our organization.
I love it. And that it gets all eyes on the issues that are emerging, but then maybe also the opportunities that could come up in a project too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like, it's interesting because anyone can raise a risk or anyone can raise an opportunity, right? So it fosters some of that innovation, and those good ideas can come from any level within the organization. You don't have to have a fancy title to identify a risk or identify an opportunity.
Well, and you all are using, just for clarity so everyone knows, are you using a modified version of SAFe?
We are, yeah. So kind of going back to, I think one of the questions was like Scrum versus SAFe versus Kanban, Lean, all these different things. I think of Agile in two ways. There's being Agile and then doing Agile. Scrum, Kanban, SAFe, all of these things kind of fall under that umbrella of doing Agile. They're a framework for you to implement Agile. Being Agile is kind of that mindset, and you need both to be successful. And so in our case, we've used kind of a modified approach to SAFe, where we kind of take elements as they fit our team's needs and we incorporate them into our process and into our flow. So there's, certainly some elements within SAFe that also include Kanban, that also include Scrum as well. And so again, we kind of customize that based on our individual teams and what they need.
Excellent. Well, and I'm curious then, with integrated teams and processes, Neil, how does that help with identifying opportunities in the construction space? Are you able to exploit more, or where's the trade-off there?
Exploit more. That's a good point. Following up on Lisa and Amy talking about meetings, weekly meetings, sit-down meetings. One of the things that I really pushed when I was a practitioner, and I push the students now, is to have daily, very short meetings with the owner's project manager and the builder's project manager. Meet about 8 o'clock in the morning every day for about 15 or 20 minutes, just to go over what's going to happen today. What are we going to do today? Because I tell you, on every construction job, what you think is going to happen tomorrow is not going to happen. There's going to be surprises. Things happen. And one of the analogies I always tell them, you're going to have a fire drill tomorrow. There's going to be a fire, not a physical fire, but something's going to screw up on the job tomorrow. You're not going to get the delivery you thought you're going to get. What are you going to do? You got 17 iron workers waiting for some steel and it doesn't come. So you have to basically build a fire department and be real flexible on these things. And I'm not sure if it was Amy or Lisa mentioned something about supply chain management. That's still a problem. That started to occur and came to the top of the list during COVID when things were crazy in 2020 and 2021. It hasn't gotten much better. So going back to your point about risk management, certainly you want to, as a builder, you want to assess the risk that you're getting into before you get into the project and sign the contract. And then once you have signed it, you want to make sure you minimize the risk of the project by being flexible. And real good example, and then I'll finish the answer, is there's a project that was just completed in Baltimore. It was a $250 million arena renovation job. $250 million in construction in a 1-year project is a lot. That's $1 million a day cash flow for every workday. That's a lot. And one of the supply chain issues that they had, and this was an integrated project delivery method with the builder and the A&E and the owner, was the electric switchgear, real critical to opening up any project. And they wanted to find the perfect electric switchgear and they couldn't find it, but they found something very close to what they wanted. And it wasn't from California. It was in the Mid-Atlantic region. And again, this project was in Baltimore. And they found it and they got the electrical subcontractor, who was also part of the integrated project delivery method as well. So, there's an old saying that the general contractor is only as good as its subcontractors. And in this case, they brought in an electrical contractor. They got the switch gear. It took about 5 or 6 months. They fixed it up. It may not have been 100%, but it was 90% of what the A&E wanted. They got it. And to make a long story short, this project was built in 1 year. And it's an arena for not just basketball, but for live shows and concerts, and it really brought Baltimore up to compete now with a lot of other industries. So it worked out.
By getting everyone on the team to identify the issues and be able to take advantage of the expertise in that trade that was part of that GC.
Yeah, and it worked.
Excellent. Well, and but speaking of risk, it can seem pretty risky to move into these kind of agile techniques. We've worked with some organizations that are kind of tiptoeing their way into integrated delivery, and Neil, you and I have talked with them in the past, but I know others here on the call are also kind of pushing the organizations to be a little bit more agile. What are some of the ways in which we can drive support for that, and how do we address the perceived risk that comes with fast tracking and those types of issues? Amy?
So the kiss of death for me is when I ping somebody on the why do we do this, and they go, because we've always done it that way.
Yeah.
Because you don't actually understand if the value is there, right? Because if we think about, I can tell you that our project records just got digitized from papers.
Oh.
Because we literally had binders of papers, and when you did a sign off, literally somebody was physically signing it off, right? And so now, of course, we have electronic sign-offs, all of the things. And so you need to look at, okay, but you've always done it this way, but you have to have an environment, right? Innovation, I don't care if it's the new iPhone to just doing something a different way, has to be fostered in the sense of it might not work a different way, but we're going to be willing to take the risk, because in the end, the long run, it will be a savings over and over again. But you have to also go, now I understand why we always did it that way, right? If there's that balance, because sometimes it is, we figured out this is actually the best way to do it, but the people who figured it out have long gone. So you just go, but there seems like there'd be a better way. And I can tell you from experience, most of the time, it was just because we always did it that way. I had an environment where I was like, are you willing to take the risk that it might be longer in cycle time, right? We're not going to kill the project by completely redoing everything. We're going to pick a piece and say, I think we could do this faster. Would you give me the opportunity on this project to try it out? And then now we have the learnings of maybe it's even a hybrid optimization of parts of how we used to do it are really important. We can't avoid those. We learned the hard way. And then the other piece is this is not necessary, right? Like everybody is doing it, right? I know we just did it, right? Everybody loves checklists. We check everything off. We just released a 22% reduction in our checklists. And we realized how many engineering hours it was where we were asking people to go, did you do your job? Right. And a few years ago, right, when we were integrating some best practices, we were reminding people what it took to do their job to make sure they were, but 22% reduction of the questions of are you doing your job by a company that releases thousands of things, that is huge. But it was one of those where we aren't going to remove it until we're sure, but like you have to be willing. Innovating might mean failure, right? Like everything new, Thomas Edison, right? 10,000 times before he finally got a light bulb, right? And so it is somewhat of that environment, but not everybody's going to do it. So pick a guinea pig, right? Like maybe the ones that not the most important $300 million arena to be like, maybe trying to do that here. No, but maybe your smaller quick project or spin to be like, I think there might be a faster and quicker way, let's do it. And then what you'll find is that you just start going, we should do it more. And then eventually nobody is doing that just because we've always done it that way, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But the silos, the functions, they like their process and they want things to come in a certain way and to interface with them in a certain way, right? Especially when we're working across functions. I imagine that's especially true in these large complex aircraft development. Lisa, do you find that introducing integrated processes and new ways of agile working are come with some resistance? How do you overcome that resistance?
Yes. Okay. So I'll just tell you, you can't always do that. Okay. There's an approach that you want to take, but then there's the human factor piece, right? So some people will be the quick adopters, right? They're all in. They'll have folks who are all excited about it, but don't always understand what they don't know, right? And then you have the folks who are going to be the silent type that will say, we'll just let this person, fail. And then you have people who are very vocal. So you really have to get to know your team and understand what you've got. This is where the relationships within the team is key. Making sure that if someone fails, you don't have them be seen as a failure more than, hey, let's go pick this back up. Let's go figure out how to solve this. Everybody pitch in here. Let's talk through how else we can do this. And so we actually talk and do things differently. So from a risk management perspective, if you think through it, we use a uniform risk tool that will go across the hardware and the software and all the different elements, because you've got to have that crosstalk. Okay, you've got to make sure that you talk to the person and say, okay, I hear and I feel this hesitance from you. Let's talk through what you're seeing. What are some things that you would want to make sure you're looking at if you were in my shoes? And then all of a sudden people start to come forward and have more conversation. Yep, you're going to have people who will still, cause issues, but you'll get more people on board and you can address them without making it onerous. I mean, I can't remember who talked about it. It may have been Caitlin, where people think it's going to be this big dog and punish you if you have to put something in a risk system. Well, you could make it that, but you don't. You take ownership of what it is, because the person really wants to do it right, and they really don't want to give up on themselves and tell you that they're not going to make it. Okay, which is why they don't bring forth risk. So if you just talk about it in general terms and say, is there anything that's bothering you? Is there anything I can help you with? Do you have a barrier that you're you're encountering? Let's talk through what it is. And those are some of the approaches that we take.
Interesting. So you make it safer for them to
Yes.
reveal the risks and to offer up a way to engage in these agile approaches. I'm kind of curious, Neil, going to you on that, because when you work across these different groups as a construction manager, working with the designer, working with the owner, maybe even with the operator, if they're also on the team, how do you get people to surface their concerns? And is that one of the issues that you run into as well? Do you also find there's a resistance of actually working as an integrated team at first?
Sometimes there is a little resistance, and that's a challenge that you have to really get over early on, very early on, from the pre-construction conference going forward. And I always felt having meetings on most projects weekly is the duration of choice, depending on the project. I was on a project many years ago in Baltimore on the Six Flags project on Pratt Street. And on that project, talking about fast track, we actually had owner meetings daily. And these were full meetings that we had daily. We try to keep them short, less than an hour, but it was real important to do it. But to answer specifically your question, it's having these meetings weekly with the owner, with the designer, and with the builder. And you also brought out a very important group, another stakeholder, the user, the occupant, very, very critical. And when I was over at Walter Reed doing work with NAFAC, which is a hospital facility, very often on most of the clinical work that I did over there, I brought the user in. And generally, they didn't know squat about construction, but they knew the medical process, and we really had to listen to them. When the nurses came in, we had to listen to them and really work around them. One of the facilities we were building was a sterile processing facility, which is the place where you sterilize all the instruments that the doctors use in surgery. And at the same time, we were building 17 ORs. And we had to coordinate those two projects. If we opened up 17 ORs and we didn't have the sterile processing facility, we'd have 17 operating rooms that the doctors couldn't do surgery because they didn't have instruments. So we had to really listen to the user and the occupants. And that's, I'm glad you brought that out, John. That's a very important part of this integrated process, the user.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's probably one of the toughest adoption challenges in some environments, is getting the users involved and getting them to actually want to and be empowered to give you that kind of feedback, right?
Yeah. Sometimes we had to drag them to the meetings.
I bet. They're like, why do I need to be working with you? I'm not even going to see this for like 2 years, right? 3 years. You need me right now?
That's exactly right. And in many cases, they were going to get transferred before the 2 years was up.
So I'm doing this for my my follow-ons, my replacements. What am I that it's interesting. It's a challenge. I imagine, Kate, that's a similar challenge you're having, especially with these long agile projects, building platforms and getting the sailors involved at the Navy.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the rotation period, right, for a sailor is relatively short in terms of their engagement with us. So while we would love to have users kind of embedded with us throughout the whole entire process, that's not always possible. And sometimes we have user representatives, right, who aren't necessarily our direct end user kind of in their place. What's interesting to me is somebody pointed out one time that, I'm developing something that may not actually get into the hands of an end user for, not just weeks or months, but might be a year or more, just based on the cadence of delivery for these ships and for some of these systems. And while on the surface that doesn't sound very agile, right? We can still use agile in the way that we kind of develop and integrate and test these systems. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge for us right now, and we're continuously trying to work to figure out, okay, how can we make this somebody's job, if you will, to be kind of that person to give us that feedback. And the same is true for other projects I've worked on throughout the DoD. So the Army has the same problem, the Air Force has the same problem. We're all trying to kind of work through this to kind of get that user feedback as close as we can to the development of the product.
Yeah. Well, you're changing lead times from 20 plus years, right? And trying to
yeah. Yeah, I think for us, for a combat system, I think it's like 8 years for hardware and like 6 years for software. So
yeah.
A year still sounds very long, but that's certainly a lot shorter than kind of what it's been in the past.
Yeah, definitely. Well, on as we come to the point where we can answer a few more kind of questions, and a bunch of them I've tried to integrate into what I've asked here so far, but one question I love to ask, and Amy, you've been wonderful at kicking us off on a lot of these transitions, is what's one of the biggest benefits you've had from integrating your teams, and how has the organization changed as a result of utilizing Agile? You talked about the checklists. That sounded like a great one. Is there another one that comes to mind?
So just in general, right? When you work on bigger projects, I think Neil kind of mentioned the cadence of how often you meet, right? Yes. So one of the things that we have done, and we've pioneered kind of in my organization, because I have to move quicker, is that you used to present to your product line manager once a month, right? And it was a big adjustment when we actually reorganized in 2017, and our product line manager said, I want to review every project every week, right? Ooh. And you're talking about a new team, storming, forming, norming, performing, right? We were just in the storming phase, right? And we were asked to take on what would be considered 4 times as many reviews, right? And so part of what it was if you're doing several projects that are very, very similar, we created infrastructure, right? And so I know that doesn't sound very agile, but in a way, we kept the same framework of how we do these multiple chop projects in parallel. So I can be agile in each project, but I can also be agile in how I execute them in a portfolio. And so we actually, now it's 5 years later, standard operating procedure, and more people are now going, let's have a shorter meeting where we don't necessarily go to the gnat's eyelash of every detail, but give me the, where are we at? What do we need to do? What help do you need to give my product line manager, who's responsible? I work in a $500 million business, right? So he wants to make sure that we're executing our projects. And that was, everybody had to be on board, because you had a team of people, and the updates, I was not expecting my project manager to go in and put all of the updates in there. Every person was responsible, kind of like Kate mentioned about risk. I am not just the person that puts together risk. If you know in your functional area you have risk, same thing with your update. If you were the one doing that work, you're expected to do that update. The project manager will facilitate. And it was a very big transition, but now we reap great benefits of, they missed the deadline. It's not me presenting to management that we missed it. It's them having to go, this was delayed by 3 days. Here's what I'm doing to catch up, which makes my job a lot easier. But it took a culture that was willing to not, point fingers at each other if we were late, but it made it much easier. So now I have a team of multiple project managers across the globe, and everybody goes into OneNote. We love OneNote. And I could go back in time. And so that, like, oh my God, I have to prepare for a weekly meeting instead of an every month meeting. But we shortened it, and we made it quicker, and we made it faster. And so in the long run, we saved time, even if I'm meeting every week. And I know that seems anti-agile, but if you're doing smaller and you're doing it quicker, created an infrastructure, we actually can get through in an hour and 20 minutes, maybe an hour and a half, a considerable amount of projects with a team of 30 to 4 people giving an update that quickly. And so to me, that's being nimble. Because
that sounds very nimble. That sounds super agile to me.
It is super agile.
Status reporting every week as opposed to a month, and you're getting all of that data directly from those doing the work. That sounds like true empowerment and in a culture of transparency that not every organization can achieve.
So
Yeah. Fantastic. Lisa, I'm curious, what were one of the major advantages you found, and how has it changed your delivery model?
So I think one of the biggest things that I saw as we've become more integrated between the hardware and software from Agile perspective is working very closely. When we do development, we work hand in glove with our customer. So our customer is seeing what's happening and understands what's going on. And so as we're having these shorter talks and we're starting to see product deliver, then the customer's more on board with saying, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. No, that's not. Yeah, wait, and we can adjust, plan, do, and adjust. But we also would see things like I mentioned brass board. We had a situation where we realized we were going to be in a lab situation and we had to use something that wasn't complete. And because our customer was integrated with us as we were working this through an Agile process, they were already getting more familiar from our stand-up meetings and so forth, what was going on. And they bought in on the changes with us. And they would point out, hey, I'll be okay if you do this, this, and this. Okay, so we could adjust. But it helped us really, really bond as a team. And this was something that wasn't just a single company. It's not one company with one customer. It's a partner companies, okay, working. So, and we had suppliers. And so it was a very integrated group of people who all had different goals, right? Because you have a goal within your own company, not just within your project. And so it helped us come with a common vision and be able to help and interface across with each other. It's been very good.
And it builds that trust because you have all that information sharing that's going on, and the team can work more efficiently. What about you, Kate, in terms of the biggest benefit and how it changed your way of working?
Yeah, so I think for us that it changed the way we communicated across our teams. I think that when you're dealing with large scale projects or large scale organizations, right, comms are hard and they're often very siloed. And so this has provided an opportunity for us to have these kind of continuous feedback loops throughout our organization across our projects. I think the other thing that's been really interesting is it's uncovered a lot of waste in the sense of like a lot of unnecessary process or a lot of unnecessary handoffs or kind of stage gates or check boxes, kind of what Amy was talking about earlier. And not to say that those things are inherently bad, because sometimes they're necessary, but I think it's really helped us to better understand kind of our value stream as an organization about what are we doing and why, and how can we deliver the best product, right, in the most timely fashion. So it's really, I would say the biggest thing, it's been communication just all around, and that the end result then is, a better product on our end.
Fantastic. Yeah. And so essential as we try to continue to maintain our competitive advantage as a nation. Neil, what about the switch from design, bid, build to CMAR and DB? What are the or other integrated delivery methods? What have been the biggest benefits and changes, the number one identified change you would say?
Probably the number one gain is involvement with the builder early on from the very beginning. The owner of development of projects knows a lot about real estate, not too much about the building part of it. Some know a little bit more or less than others. And the designer, the architects and engineers, as smart as they are, they don't really have a real good handle on construction, on schedule, on cost, and products. So bringing in the expertise of the builder right from the beginning. Sure, you're going to pay a little fee for the involvement, but when I started on those kind of projects and got involved early on, whether it was me or it was somebody else in pre-construction, brought so much to the table that after the planning and design was done and the project was underway, the project was so much better because of the input by the builder early on that it's really made some of these other project delivery methods, which are really integrated methods such as design build, construction management at risk, even construction management agency. We work on a fee basis rather than at risk, but just bringing in the builder very early on, right from the beginning, maybe even before the architect is hired, makes a lot of sense. And I think I've certainly learned, and I'm a big proponent of it, you can do so many more things. When the builder is on board early, you can fast track the job. You brought up fast track about a half an hour ago. Fast tracking is where you overlap design and construction and planning, and maybe get started on construction with 3/4 of the design being done. And you can really fast track the job. That brings up a little more risk, but it can really lead to a faster, better product.
And that means less delay in terms of being able to now run the whole organization that is using that facility, right? You now are you're getting the operations up and running at that point.
Right, and one other benefit of these integrated project delivery methods is very often you go to a fixed price, sort of speak, or a guaranteed maximum price. And if you can bring in the job earlier and save money, a lot of the contracts I had with owners as the builder, we would have a shared savings. So there was an incentive to me, the builder, to come in early. I'd get some of the savings, maybe split it 50-50 with the owner. So if it's a $1 million job and we bring in the job for 48 million, save 2 million, and we split it, 1 million for him or her, 1 million for me. It was a win-win situation, and time is money. So, and in construction, that meter is really ticking fast, and it's very expensive what it costs to run a job on a daily basis. And if you can bring in a job 2, 3, 4 months early, the owner can start getting revenue, can start using the facility earlier, and it's a win-win situation. So it works out real well with these integrated project delivery methods. Fantastic.
No cost is higher than the cost of delay in most cases, except for extreme cases of risk. But I think that is a fantastic note to kind of wrap up our primary discussion on. I would like to, at this point, let everyone know that we are just 2 minutes past the hour in which we scheduled to be here. We did start a few minutes late. Happy to maintain and entertain another question or two. But just wanted to say thank you all for being here, for those who have to leave now, and that we plan to do another one of these, potentially around procurement and the kind of contracting that Neil was just talking about, guaranteed maximum price and other forms of risk-sharing contracts that enable for better performance and better risk sharing, and opportunity sharing, which could be very exciting. So let's go ahead then and see. We've got a couple of additional questions here. I think one of the elements that we didn't get to, and I've seen this question come through a few times, is a big risk or downside, maybe a case where it didn't work out. How did you handle it when you tried to integrate or introduce Agile processes? This is an open question. Anyone have an example of where they misstepped in applying Agile, and how did they recover so that it wouldn't prevent future continuous improvement?
So I have an example, not of that, but of reticence for people to be willing to adopt it, because I answered it in the chat. But I get a lot of, you're kind of crazy. Why are you just not doing it the way we've always done it? It's not going to work, right? The devil, right? Everybody's been scarred by the grass is always greener, or whatever it is, where with the side I know, right? And when it could be beautiful on the other side, you're not just willing to go see, right? And what I found is that the non-believers are now in the boat of they're being forcefully kind of, the results are there. We know that there's a better and a faster way, and reticence to accept or change, even if it's just a slightly easier way to do it. So I'm known for parallel execution, right? So when I release semiconductors, there's different channel counts, either 1, 2, or 4. And you always did the first one and made sure it was perfect before you ever started on the next one. And so truly, like, parts of a family might take you 3 years to release, right? And we have went a little crazy and did the first one and then the second two together. And now I'm doing all 3 channel counts all at the same time. And it is incredibly risky. And I might be talking to you in a year saying, don't do that, right? But I'm still trying to get the people that are doing complete projects in parallel, where literally the design has been validated and you're just either putting you're gluing 2 of them together and gluing 4 of them together of a known thing,
Sure.
and they will not
Yeah.
start the next project. And now I just got done with an LT meeting where we were offsite, and it was like, but I can see it in the cycle time. It takes you 3 years, and she can release a family in her product line in 9 to 12 months. That's huge, because yes. And so now they're kind of being like, the results are there, but yes, people are
can't
very
ignore the
reticent.
data.
Yes,
We can do
can't
this
ignore the
faster,
data.
better.
So sometimes you just have to be the one to be crazy. We've never done it this way, right? And then, hopefully it isn't the alternative, which you said that didn't work, right? Is that people are now being like, well, okay, if that method for the type of project fits the type, okay, we could consider it, right? But you also have to have people who are willing to try a different way. And I deal a lot with, we've just always done it this way, and this works, and I know it. I don't care that it's not efficient, but it's how I know how to do it.
Your
And so,
limited innovation project
really hard to
is taking
change.
longer than her breakthrough projects. So why is that? Well, okay, so data is convincing. Mhm.
Data is convincing. If you're successful, it's
If you're
also
successful,
convincing
that's
if you're
right.
not, that maybe that isn't the way to do it, and she really was crazy. So
Start small. Yeah, I like it. Excellent.
I'll take one wrap-up thought there real quick.
Please do. So,
And that is, don't try to cookie cutter everything. That I did watch a project where the leader said, oh no, everybody's going to absolutely do 2-week sprints. Didn't matter if your hardware or software watched it really go by the wayside. And the other thing is, when I watched a team who thought that software in Agile meant I do 2-week sprints and I just keep moving stuff down and I really don't meet milestones. So you really got to think through, what does it really take to get your product done? And then go in and adapt the right pieces and techniques. So it's not cookie cutter.
I like it. I like it. That's that Agile mindset that Kate had brought up earlier about, there's the doing Agile and the being Agile, and don't let the doing overcome the being. Yep, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, excellent. Any other final thoughts from the panel?
So my only closing thought is, I saw also a stream of, there are certain things, know what you're building. I think we just said, know what you're building, right? Doing Agile fits for certain types of projects, right? And so don't just say, oh, well, that's the latest project management framework. So, right, if the only tool in your tool belt is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Yep.
So that is where understanding doing Agile versus being Agile, right? There's all these opportunities, but it is not a good idea if you know that you are building, there's things in Agile you can do, but there's not a way when in certain projects that you could ever be completely Agile, right? So make sure that the framework in doing Agile, you're doing it when it makes sense, right? Otherwise, be Agile. And in some instances, you'll do Agile and be Agile, right? In some instances, you're going to look at what are they doing and how are they optimizing? How are they doing it faster, right? How not being rigid in scope, that you can adopt the ideas behind the framework, but you don't have to do Agile, right? I can tell you, unless there's very few instances where I would completely be Agile, but I'm going to be Agile, right?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. The principle remains, but the process may change, and we need to be appreciative of the work we're doing and those change costs. Fantastic. Any other final thoughts from the panel?
I think Amy's point about we hit the nail on the head tonight really works.
That's right. There you go. This hammer struck true. Well, Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to have another roundtable. We're going to be developing that and announcing it and releasing it. But I want to say thank you to our panelists for providing us with all of your insights. This has been a fantastic conversation, really insightful. I know that I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone has too. And thank you to everybody who participated in the discussion in the chat. We really enjoyed seeing those comments and questions. They helped guide me as well. So I appreciate your support. And we look forward to having everybody at the next one. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks very much.